Imagine realizing that you have slowly, just kind of methodically engineered your entire life.
Right.
Your career choices, your family vacations, even, the specific suburban streets you drive down every single morning to get to work.
Yeah.
And doing all of that around the goal of completely avoiding a single, totally harmless bridge.
It sounds exhausting, honestly.
It really does. I mean, from the outside, your life looks completely normal.
Yeah.
But internally, every single day is this massive logistical puzzle designed to just keep you away from that one structure.
Which is a hidden reality for millions of people, yeah.
Exactly. And today, we are looking at a stack of incredibly eye-opening materials on specific phobias. And our mission for this deep dive is to understand how these seemingly isolating and overwhelming fears are actually incredibly common.
They really are.
And surprisingly, highly treatable.
It really is a profound shift in perspective when you dig into this material. Because, when you look at the actual clinical data we have in front of us, you realize just how many people are silently navigating their lives around these invisible internal obstacles.
Right.
We so often dismiss these fears as like mere quirks, but the reality is far more restrictive for the person experiencing it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because according to the source material, a specific phobia isn't just a strong dislike. It's actually defined as an intense, persistent fear of a specific object or situation.
Yes, and the persistence is key there.
Right, because to meet the clinical criteria, this fear has to last for 6 months or more. So we are talking about fears of flying, heights, needles, enclosed spaces.
Things that cause meaningful avoidance.
Exactly, severe distress, and a real impairment in someone's daily functioning.
And just to set the stakes here, this isn't some rare niche issue that only affects a handful of people in extraordinary circumstances. The documents note that specific phobias affect approximately 9% of U.S. adults.
Wait, 9%?
9%, yeah. So if you're sitting in a crowded coffee shop or like a mid-sized office meeting, the statistical probability is that someone in that room is fighting this battle right now.
That's incredible.
It makes it one of the most prevalent anxiety disorders out there. It is highly likely that you, the person listening right now, or someone very close to you, is dealing with this on a daily basis.
Which brings us to the core of what we are going to explore today. Because we aren't just going to rattle off a list of things people happen to be afraid of. We are going to explore the paradox of how these fears actively shrink people's lives.
Yeah, the shrinking is the hardest part.
And the underlying psychological trap that keeps people stuck in that cycle for years. Plus, the targeted therapies that can literally break that cycle, sometimes in a matter of just hours or weeks.
What's fascinating here is the core paradox of the condition. Because the text points out that from the outside looking in, a phobia can look incredibly small, like almost trivial.
Right, like an easy fix.
Exactly. The outside world says, just don't book a flight, or just look away when the nurse brings the needle, it'll be over in 2 seconds.
Right.
But from the inside, the experience is entirely different. From the inside, the phobia actively narrows your universe.
I want to push back a little on that casual dismissal people have, though.
Oh, absolutely.
That whole just don't fly mentality. Because when you read the lived experience of this in the sources, it's like someone living with an invisible fence in their yard.
That's a great way to put it.
Like the ones used to keep dogs from running into the street.
Yeah, the electronic ones.
Right. To the mailman walking by, the yard looks completely open. There is no physical wall blocking the path.
Yeah.
But the person living inside that yard knows exactly where the shock is waiting for them.
Yes.
And that invisible boundary dictates every single move they make.
And that invisible boundary is entirely real to their nervous system, yes.
Yeah.
The clinical features outlined in the DSM-5 really ground this reality. Well, the diagnostic manual doesn't just say a person is afraid of something. It specifies that the phobic object or situation almost always provokes immediate fear or anxiety.
Immediate.
Right. It is actively avoided, or it's endured with intense, gripping suffering. And the fear is entirely out of proportion to the actual danger.
Right, which makes sense.
And as you mentioned, it lasts for 6 months or more, and crucially, it causes clinically significant distress or impairment. It literally alters the trajectory of a life.
And the tragic part is that the person usually knows the fence shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
By their own admission, the text says they know the fear is irrational. But the fence still commands their behavior.
It overrides their logic.
Exactly. So they skip family vacations because they just can't handle the airport. They refuse lucrative job promotions because the new role might require travel. They decline social events.
Or take ridiculously longer driving routes.
Yes. Adding hours to a trip just to avoid a tunnel. They might never see a grandchild who lives across the country. The outside world sees someone who just, doesn't like spiders. But the inside reality is a life constantly shrinking to stay safely behind that invisible fence.
And when you look at the categories in the DSM-5, they basically map out the entire human experience and how these invisible fences get built.
Let's walk through those.
Sure. So you have evolutionary fears, things like animal phobias. So
Yeah.
spiders, dogs, snakes, insects.
Makes sense, biologically.
Right. And you also have natural environment phobias, which cover heights, storms, deep water, or the dark. These are things our ancient ancestors probably had a very healthy respect for.
Right, but the phobic response cranks the dial up to an unmanageable level.
Exactly.
But then you have these highly modern situational hurdles, too. Like the sourceless situational phobias, things like flying in commercial jets, taking elevators, driving over bridges, or being in enclosed spaces.
Yeah, the modern world creates its own challenges, and we cannot forget the medical side of things. The third category listed is blood injection injury.
Which is a big one.
It is. This covers needles, invasive medical procedures, and seeing blood. And finally, there's the other category, which captures intense, life-altering fears of vomiting, choking, loud sounds, or even seemingly benign things like costumed characters.
When you lay it all out like that, it's easy to see how any one of those categories intersects with just basic daily functioning.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, a situational fear of enclosed spaces isn't just about avoiding a tight closet. It means you can't take the elevator to a job interview on the 20th floor.
Right.
A fear of needles isn't just a quirk. It means avoiding routine blood work that could literally detect a serious illness.
Precisely. The avoidance inherently demands a sacrifice of your well-being or your potential.
So if this invisible fence is costing people their careers, their family connections, and their health, the obvious question is, why stay in the yard? If someone's life is shrinking this much, why don't they just go get help immediately? What keeps them trapped in this invisible fence for years or even decades?
Well, the answer, ironically, is that from a psychological standpoint, staying in the yard works.
Wait, I need you to explain that. How does running away from a problem work?
It works in the immediate neurobiological sense. The text breaks down the mechanics of why people suffer for so long, and it comes down to a powerful psychological trap. Avoidance actually functions as a highly effective short-term solution.
Yeah.
When a person is confronted with the thing they fear, their anxiety spikes. Their internal alarm system just starts screaming.
Right.
But when they avoid the object, like when they walk away from the elevator and take the stairs, their immediate anxiety drops drastically.
I see.
And that instant relief accidentally reinforces the avoidance. It trains the brain. The brain essentially says, see, running away kept you safe from whatever terrible thing was about to happen. You need to do that again next time. So it becomes a self-sustaining loop. The avoidance reduces the anxiety, which makes the avoidance habit stronger, which ultimately makes the fear feel even more dangerous the next time it comes up.
It's like putting a bucket under a leaky roof instead of fixing the shingles.
It's a perfect analogy.
I mean, sure, it works today. It prevents a puddle in your living room this afternoon. The immediate crisis is averted, and you feel relieved. But eventually, the whole ceiling rots and caves in. You haven't fixed the fundamental problem. You've just accommodated the daily damage.
That is exactly the mechanism at play. And speaking of accommodation, the sources highlight that external factors play a huge role in maintaining this trap, too.
Oh, like other people?
Yeah, friends and family often inadvertently become part of the avoidance loop. They accommodate the phobia.
Right.
They agree to drive the extra 2 hours to avoid the highway, or they agree to host every single holiday dinner so the person doesn't have to board a plane.
Yeah, out of love.
Exactly. They do it out of love to save the person from distress, but it makes the shrinking lifestyle entirely sustainable.
They are essentially helping to prop up the invisible fence.
They are. And furthermore, the text notes that people don't seek help for a variety of very practical reasons, too.
Not quite.
Well, there is the barrier of cost. There is the profound embarrassment of admitting you are terrified of something everyone else handles easily.
Oh, that makes sense.
Sometimes people simply don't know what to call their issue. They just think it's a permanent flaw in their personality. Or, and this is a massive barrier, they assume that treatment sounds awful and that nothing can really be done to change how their brain works anyway.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because that assumption that nothing can be done or that you are permanently broken, is completely flipped on its head by the clinical data in our sources.
Yes, it is.
Specific phobia is actually one of the most treatable anxiety disorders out there.
It is incredibly treatable.
The text states that targeted therapy often produces rapid, highly durable results, sometimes within just 8 to 12 sessions.
8 to 12 sessions to dismantle a fear that might have controlled someone's life for 20 years.
That's amazing.
When you look at the timeline, it is truly a staggering return on investment for facing your fear. The gold standard for achieving this, according to the evidence-based treatments in the text, is exposure therapy.
Okay, I have to push back here on behalf of the listener.
Sure.
Because if someone is utterly terrified of enclosed spaces, telling them the gold standard treatment is to force them into an elevator sounds more like trauma than therapy.
I can see why it sounds that way.
I think people hear exposure therapy and imagine a, fear factor scenario where someone is just locked in a dark room full of snakes. How does that not just make the fear infinitely worse?
That is a very common misconception, but clinical exposure therapy is nothing like a reality television stunt. It works through a deeply researched neurological mechanism called habituation.
Habituation.
Right. Your brain's alarm system cannot stay activated forever. If you stay in the presence of the feared object without running away, without engaging in that avoidance loop, your nervous system eventually exhausts its alarm response.
So the anxiety just runs out of steam.
Essentially, yes. The anxiety naturally plateaus and then drops. You are quite literally rewriting the brain's association from danger to safe by proving to your nervous system that no catastrophe actually occurred.
Okay, so it's like getting into a freezing cold swimming pool.
Yeah.
If you dip your toe in and jump out immediately because it's cold, your brain just remembers the shock. That's the avoidance loop.
Exactly.
But if you force yourself to slowly wade into the water and stay there for 5 minutes, your body naturally acclimates. The water didn't magically get warmer. Your nervous system just adjusted to the reality of the environment.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize habituation. And the source material outlines several very measured, highly structured variations of how clinicians help patients enter that pool.
Let's walk through that toolkit because the sources show it's very adaptable.
It is. The primary variation is in vivo exposure. This involves gradual, planned encounters with the actual feared object or situation in the real world.
Okay.
Gradual being the operative word. A clinician doesn't start by putting you on a plane. They might start by having you look at photos of an airport, then visiting an airport lobby, slowly building up your tolerance.
But what if the real world isn't practical? I mean, if you have a severe fear of flying, you can't exactly practice taking off and landing on a commercial jet every Tuesday afternoon to build up your habituation.
Which is why the toolkit includes imaginal exposure. This is where the clinician guides the person in vividly and systematically imagining the feared scenario when in vivo is logistically impossible.
Does that actually work?
It does. The brain still processes the imagined threat, allowing habituation to occur.
The sources also list virtual reality exposure, or VR. The text specifically mentions this is incredibly useful for those logistically hard things, like flying or standing on the edge of a tall building. It immerses the brain enough to trigger the alarm system so you can practice calming it down, all from the safety of a therapist's office.
And the final variation is one many people have never heard of, interoceptive exposure.
Interoceptive.
Yeah, this is specifically targeted at phobias that are linked to internal body sensations.
So instead of being afraid of a spider or a bridge outside, the fear is attached to something happening inside the body,
Wow.
like the physical sensation of a racing heart or a tight throat.
Yes. The clinician helps the patient safely recreate those physical sensations. Maybe by spinning in a chair to induce dizziness or breathing through a straw to simulate shortness of breath.
Oh.
So the patient learns that the physical feeling itself is not dangerous. But perhaps the most mind-blowing statistic in this entire deep dive comes next. The text points out the incredible efficacy of single-session treatments.
Let's slow down on that for a second.
Yeah.
Single session.
Yeah.
As in, a person walks in on a Tuesday morning and is done by the afternoon.
Exactly. The source describes masked, prolonged in vivo exposure lasting just 3 to 5 hours that has shown remarkable efficacy for specific phobias.
That is unbelievable.
And think about that ratio. We are talking about decades of shrinking your life, missing weddings, driving hours out of your way dismantled in 3 to 5 hours under the guidance of a professional.
Wow.
A person can achieve results that completely alter the entire trajectory of their life in a single afternoon.
So what does this all mean for the person listening? We know what phobias are. We know how the avoidance trap works in the brain. And we know there are highly effective, surprisingly fast treatments utilizing habituation.
Right.
But when does this stop being just a frustrating inconvenience?
Right.
When does a specific phobia cross the line into an absolute crisis where someone needs to prioritize treatment immediately?
The sources outline very clear scenarios where a specific phobia warrants a priority referral. These are situations where the invisible fence isn't just limiting a vacation, it is actively threatening the person's basic health, safety, and livelihood.
Let's look at those priority cases. The text points heavily to blood and needle phobias.
Yes, this becomes a critical priority when it actively interferes with life-saving preventative care. If an adult cannot get necessary vaccinations, or if they refuse diagnostic blood work that could catch a disease early,
Right.
or if they cannot get surgical clearance because they are too terrified of an IV that is no longer an inconvenience, that is a medical crisis.
The text also highlights flying phobias as a priority referral. Now, missing a trip to Hawaii is sad, but it isn't a crisis.
Exactly.
It becomes a priority when it blocks access to specialized medical care that might only be available out of state, or when it prevents someone from taking a critical job opportunity that would support their family, or when it totally severs their connection to loved ones.
Then there are choking or vomiting phobias. These warrant priority referral when the avoidance loop begins to restrict basic nutrition.
That sounds terrifying.
It is. Some individuals become so terrified of choking that they stop eating solid foods entirely, or they refuse to engage in any social eating, leading to severe isolation and malnutrition.
And finally, driving phobias.
Mhm.
In many places, especially outside of major metropolitan transit hubs, not being able to drive severely limits a person's employment opportunities,
Definitely.
traps them at home, and strips away their basic adult autonomy.
When a phobia hits these levels, the avoidance loop is actively dismantling the person's life infrastructure.
Which is why the final section of our source material is so crucial, because it isn't just theory. It provides a highly specific, practical solution for getting help.
Yes.
Our notes highlight a specific resource, Coping and Healing Counseling, or CHC. And what's fantastic is they break down exactly how accessible this intervention is.
Because accessibility is often the biggest hurdle. As we noted earlier, the logistics of finding a therapist, the cost, and the fear of the treatment itself keep people trapped.
So let's clear those hurdles. According to the text, CHC is a therapy practice that serves all 159 counties in Georgia.
That's a huge reach.
It is. It is 100% telehealth and completely high-pay compliant, meaning you can do this from the absolute privacy of your own home. They boast a diverse, culturally competent team of over 15 licensed therapists.
Which is great for finding the right fit.
Absolutely. And to translate the acronyms in our source, they have LCSWs, LPCs, and LMFTs. That means clinical social workers, professional counselors, and marriage and family therapists. You aren't just getting a life coach, you're getting clinically trained professionals.
Professionals who specialize in exactly the kind of exposure-informed habituation care we've been discussing.
And they specifically remove that financial barrier we discussed. According to the text, if you have Medicaid, there is a $0 copay. $0.
That is incredible.
And for major commercial plans, they explicitly list Aetna, Cigna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, United Healthcare, and Humana. The cost is an incredibly low $10 to $40 per session.
I want to emphasize a really crucial line from the source material here, though. Something designed to reassure anyone listening who might be feeling a spike in their own anxiety just hearing us talk about facing a fear.
Oh, please do.
The text explicitly says, the next step is a conversation with a licensed clinician, not a confrontation with the fear itself.
That is such a vital distinction. You do not have to jump out of a plane or hold a tarantula tomorrow.
Right.
You just have to make a phone call and talk to another human being about what you're experiencing. The diagnosis is made by a licensed clinician, and they guide you through the process at your pace. You control the depth of the water you wade into.
It takes all the pressure off. The goal of that first session is simply to start mapping out the invisible fence, not to throw you over it against your will.
For anyone ready to start dismantling that fence, the contact details from the source are very straightforward. You can reach Coping and Healing Counseling at chadingtherapy.com, or you can call them directly at 404-832-0102.
That's excellent.
Again, if a fear has been keeping you off bridges, out of planes, or away from critical medical care, It is genuinely treatable. You do not have to live inside a shrinking yard.
It really is a profound message of hope, and more importantly, it is hope grounded in solid, proven clinical evidence.
It truly is. So, to summarize the journey of this deep dive, we started by looking at the reality of specific phobias, recognizing that they are far more than just minor quirks. They are invisible fences that profoundly shrink our world and dictate our potential.
Absolutely.
We explore the paradox of the avoidance loop, learning how running away feels like a solution, but is actually the exact mechanism that keeps the fear alive. Exactly. And most importantly, we learn the mechanics of how breaking those fences down is highly achievable. Through habituation and targeted exposure therapy, often in just 8 to 12 sessions or even a single masked session, people can rewrite their brain's alarm system and reclaim their lives.
It's life-changing.
It's heavily researched, highly effective, and through resources like CHC, it is more accessible than ever.
Knowledge really is most valuable when it's understood and applied. Recognizing the mechanics of that avoidance loop in your own brain is the very first step to stepping out of it.
We want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your day. Even if you don't have a diagnosable clinical phobia, think about your own daily routines. What is one minor thing you consistently avoid just to keep your anxiety at bay?
That's a great question.
A difficult conversation, a certain social situation. And if you mapped out all those tiny daily avoidances, would you discover you've been building an invisible fence of your own without even noticing?
Gives you a lot to think about.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we will catch you next time.